I can teach you how to bewitch the mind and ensnare the senses. I can tell you how to bottle fame, brew glory, and even put a stopper in death.
Welcome to Snape Chat, the voice of the Snapedom, the podcast where we discuss all things Snape, always. Join us as we dive into the world of the bravest man we ever knew in art, fanfic, meta, and more. Obviously. This is Snapecentric with episode 44, and I will be speaking with Mundungus42. She's an amazing fandom elder, author, and wizard rocker with a lot of fascinating insights. Enjoy the show. All right, this is Snapecentric, and I'm here with Mundungus42.
Hello, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining me. You've done so much fic writing and your music and everything, so I'm really looking forward to chatting with you.
I've been in sort of like a small corner of the Snape fandom for a long time, so getting to sort of venture outside of that is exciting for me.
Yeah. Oh, I see you. Are you writing a new one now?
Yeah. I can't give you any details about it because it's an anonymous fest, but I've joined the Hearts and Cauldrons Discord server, which is a Severus Hermione specific space, and they do a lot of fests. So I'm writing for their Gift Fest, which will be posting starting in December. And so I'm working on something for that. And I'm very excited to be there just because I'd sort of stepped away from writing Harry Potter fiction, right? I think the last thing that I wrote was in 2019 prior to joining, just because the pandemic happened and then the whole turf apocalypse happened in the Harry Potter fandom. So I was just really not wanting to be in that space. And then I started reading fic again, and that sort of led me to reach out to find some other, perhaps new to me spaces that were radically inclusive and kind, because those were two things that were really important to me, just because I'm to the point, I've been in fandom long enough that I don't seek out drama, and places that have a lot of drama are not interesting to me. So I was looking for a place that was safe, a place that was kind, and I found that on Discord, which was delightful.
That's excellent.
Yeah, I'm in a few different Harry Potter Discords, one for Wizard Rock, because I started getting into that during the pandemic. I mean, I was aware of the genre forever, basically, since it started, but that was kind of for the cool young kids. I was one of the fan crones at that point. So I was over in my little Severus Hermione corner, with all the fic writers, and, we got together in, what was that, Azcatraz in 2009, and it was just one of the best fandom experiences I ever had. And it was just really, really fun to spend a lot of time not just among Harry Potter fans, but people who were into the exact same things I was. And that was a joy.
Yeah, I don't know. The Wizard Rock thing is so interesting. I've actually done a few shows with Snape Rock.
Yes.
And that's been so fun.
Yeah, I'm still a baby in that fandom, or in that area of fandom, but it's just been so cool because so my evenings and weekends job is I'm a choral singer, so I'm a professional musician, but I'm not a professional rock musician by any stretch. And so I sort of got adopted by some friends who were in a chamber choir that all three of us are involved in the same professional chamber choir. And I met our lead singer because he was wearing this beautiful embroidered Hogwarts jacket. And I walked into rehearsal, and this was this person I didn't know very well wearing this very blatant fandom signal. And I'm like, you don't know this, but we're friends now. And it turns out he's a big Snape guy as well. So like our Wizard Rock band is a trio, and we've got 2 Slytherins and 1 Ravenclaw. So
All right.
we get on quite well. But yeah, both of them. So our lead singer is really into Wizard Rock, and our producer, songwriter, lead guitarist, he's super duper experienced in rock music. He's been playing in rock bands and ska bands since he was in high school. And they brought me along largely because I write, and they also know that I can sing, I mean, since we're all singers. But yeah, so that's how all that got started. It was a pandemic project because for musicians, just everything went away during the pandemic. It was the first time in our adult lives that we didn't have rehearsal every night. It was the first time in our adult lives where we had no opportunity to make music together. And so we recorded stuff in our homes, and Red Leader basically cobbled them together and, made our first song, which was making fun of Betsy DeVos through the lens of Dolores Umbridge. So it kind of went from there.
Oh,
We definitely wanted to have kind of an activist angle to our music because it started during the first administration of the 45th president, and we had a lot to say about that. We were writing songs in response to school shootings. I wrote a song in response to January 6th, which is sadly extra relevant right now. So a lot of this, because the name of our band is Potter Watch, and that name was chosen specifically because it's protest against Potter Watching Canon and the Deathly Hallows is this pirate radio program where it's the only place where you can hear reliable news about what's going on in the resistance, and that's kind of what we wanted to be in the Wizard Rock space, particularly post-apocalypse. So again, we wanted to find spaces that were filled with people who are kind and accepting, and not just that, but like radically inclusive, reaching out and saying this is a safe place for you to explore the things you love, and we want to be part of that. We want to protect that. We want to nurture that. We don't want to be part of the problem. So we donate, I think, a minimum of 50% of the proceeds from our music to Trevor Project and or Mermaids UK, which are both organizations that support trans youth.
that is so cool.
It was really important to us. And I've been in the Harry Potter fandom since 2001, 2002. I started really reading Harry Potter fic 1999, 2000, and after Goblet of Fire happened.
Mhm.
Just the universe really opened up for me, and I really wanted to be part of it. So I've been part of this space for a long time, and I didn't want to let one person's bigotry spoil all that. I mean, I met some of my best friends through the Harry Potter fandom. I'm not going to let JKR take that away from me. So,
Good deal. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
oh, sure. I probably. Hi. I'm I am Mundungus42. I am 46 years old. I live in California. I'm married to my beta reader, Mr. 42. We have 2 dogs. Let's see. I started reading Harry Potter back when there were only 3 books. I was in college at the time, and one of my good friends on a sports team found out that I was a baby in terms of having read in sci-fi and fantasy, and so she got me reading all the classics of sci-fi, all the classics of fantasy, and she was the person that showed me Babylon 5 for the first time, and she gave me the first 3 Harry Potter books to read, and I sort of found fan fiction through a different area, but when she found out that I also read fan fiction, we started exchanging recs for fanfic, and she's still one of my dear, dear friends. And so I'm one of the weirdos that came to fanfic through real life connections rather than finding it online myself. But it worked out really well for me, and I got no complaints.
Oh, that's great. Yes, sometimes it takes a long time to find fanfic, I think.
And even among fanfic to find your people, because it's
Yes.
such a huge space
Mhm.
with a plethora of ideas and about what should be certain ways. And some people have very strong opinions about that. And, even now, when I enter a fandom space, I'm not always sure if it's going to be a Snape friendly place. I'm not, and my ship in particular, it can be divisive even among Snape fans. So I try to be respectful of other people. I try not to yuck anybody's yum, but I also have no expectations
Mhm.
that I'm going to be treated reciprocally. So I tend to be very tentative in how I approach people, and I can usually tell from talking to them a little bit if they're going to be open to the stuff that I'm interested in, and that's fine. I mean, that's true for any sort of activity where people can have some trauma related to that. And I went to the last LeakyCon in Portland last summer, and that was cool because my band got to play, and it was really neat. But I'd been warned ahead of time there are a lot of anti-Snape people there, and I ended up sitting in a panel that was led by one, and it was a fascinating panel. Don't get me wrong, but not only was this person very anti-Snape, they like the squickiest of squicky ships for them is my OTP.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, doo doo doo. And I had this big piece of Snape fan art that I just bought from my friend Foxa Staccato, and I just sort of turned it around so nobody would see it.
Oh God.
Because I wasn't there to stir shit. I mean, I wasn't there to
Right.
make anyone feel uncomfortable or tell anyone that they're wrong for I mean, the whole panel was about all your faves are problematic. So,
Oh,
which is true, and, and this is true regardless of whether my fave is the thing you hate or whether your fave is a thing that grosses me out. I mean, there's room for all of us.
right. So was that part of the topic was not bullying other people?
Yeah, and also enforcing your own boundaries.
Uh,
For example, the person who was leading the panel said, I am in education. I self-identify with Neville Longbottom. I think that Snape is the most evil person in canon. And if you come to me, if you hear this and your instinct is to come tell me I'm wrong and tell me I need to get over it, then I know you're not a safe person and I need to step back from that.
mhm,
This person was also going on about how they love in Veronica Mars, they love the character of Logan Eccles. And I think she described him, yes, I know he's a shit, but I love him anyway. So, but they were perfectly aware of the fact that Logan Eccles probably squicks other people. And so it's all about treating people respectfully and knowing that there's no such thing as purity.
mhm,
There's no pure creator. There are no pure canons. There is nothing that is beyond reproach. And so it's all about finding a space where, it's just not being a jerk to people, I think is a really good way
uh-huh.
of putting it. Whereas was it Dan Savage who was just like, don't be a dick, or the campsite rule.
I'm sorry, how the campsite rule?
Oh yeah, that had to do with relationships. And it was just like, especially if you're an older person engaging with a younger person in a relationship, your job is to leave it. If you know it's a short-term relationship, leave the campsite not torn up, leave it at least as nicely as you found it. Leave the person, you know, uh,
Okay,
yeah, just to look at all relationships with people is, don't try to make people worse than they already are. Don't prey on their insecurities. Don't try to control them. Don't do these things. These are, as a person in a cross-gen ship, that always resonated for me. And it's just like, because you have plenty of portrayals of Snape where he's pretty horrible and doesn't really respect the campsite rule. And so for me, finding a way to have a relationship between him and someone else where there's enough respect and enough awareness of the other person's interior life that they can meet on an equal level, and finding a way to deal with the power and experience differential. And that's something that I find very interesting, and that's true of Snary, that's true of any, it's true of Severus Hermione, it's true of any sort of cross-gen ship, that
sure.
there has to be, for me personally. I mean, God knows I've read plenty of unhealthy Snape and Hermione relationships, and I love those as well. I'm less interested in writing them myself.
Sure.
I've probably done a very bad job of explaining that, but yeah, Dan Savage is a relationship and sex columnist for many years, and that is one of his contributions to the lexicon, right up there with Santor. Yeah. Oh, sorry. This is a bit gross, but Rick Santorum was a politician who was very anti-gay at the time, and so Dan Savage basically wanted to come up with the most vile definition of something pertaining to gay sex, and to call it Santorum. So, if you want to know what Santorum is, you can Google that, and actually, Dan Savage's disgusting gay sex related. It's the frothy mix of lube and fecal matter that
Oh,
happens from anal intercourse, and
okay.
that is what Santorum is, and that's the number one definition, and has been for a number of years, because Rick Santorum's political career, for some reason, went phew into
Hmm.
the toilet, where Santorum belongs.
Yes.
But anyway, sorry,
Oh no, that's all right.
I'm mid caffeine and I tend to be discursive.
Well, that's perfect because we want to hear what you have to say.
And now
Oh,
I can say a lot of things. There's no guarantee of quality, that's why I have a beta reader for my stories.
oh, and that's something so interesting that your husband is your beta reader. That's neat that you can share that.
It's been wonderful. So we'd been together a number of years before I started writing fanfic. He knew that I read it. and he was also big into Harry Potter. The two of us and friends would dress up for the book and movie
Oh, nice.
releases. So he's a big Harry Potter fan as well. And so when I started writing fan fiction, because I was a competent writer, but I also needed to get another person's input. And he was always very supportive. He's read almost every story I've written and provided feedback. And if there's anything that confuses him or anything that he dislikes, even if I don't specifically take his suggestion for changing it, I change it. Because if he runs into an issue, then I know other people are going to have the same thing. And I think me being very active in a fandom space gave him permission to do so when something came along that he was really interested in. So one of my Severus Hermione friends, who was studying children's literature at the time, recommended My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. So the two of us decided we were going to watch it together. And after the very first two-parter episode, we ended up, I think we were up till like 2 in the morning talking about it.
Oh, wow.
And I was saying things like, I see the character of Pinkie Pie as being this repository for intergenerational feminine wisdom. And he was like, yeah, and we're talking about Granny Pie. Are we ever going to meet this character? You know, we were so into it, like from the first episode. And he's a brony now.
I love that.
And he'll show me he's more interested in the fan art space. He does read a little bit, but mostly he'll be like, "Oh, you should see this really beautiful," because he has his ships. He has his, points of interest, and they're not all the same as mine, but that's fine. We both get that about each other and can just take joy in one another's happiness and say, "I'm really happy you found this."
Uh-huh.
So he's been a wonderful partner, I mean, pretty much since day one, and this is just a very cool and very us extension thereof.
That's so great.
Yeah, he's good people. I'm fond.
Yay. Let's see, you started fanfic with X-Files.
I did. So when I was in college, I avoided going home. I kind of avoided going home for the entire summer by working at summer camps at my university. And for 2 years, I was a counselor for the School of Music. And so it was for musically gifted high school juniors and seniors. And so my first year, I had this entire like corner of a dorm, and I really loved my kids and they loved me. And they put up this sign that said, "Welcome to," it wasn't Mundungus42, but "Welcome to Mundungus42 land, a place of laughter and love." And I'm just like, yay. But one of my kids who was a string player, she came to me and asked me if I liked the X-Files. And I'm like, I love the X-Files. It's one of the few shows that I actually watched regularly when I was in college. Well, also because I grew up in a small town where we only got certain networks and we didn't have cable. So it was one of the few that I could watch. And so she said, "Well, do you know what fan fiction is?" I said, "No, what is this? Tell me." This was like back in 1998, 19. Yeah, I think it was summer 98 or 99. Yeah. And she basically said, "Well, it's where you take the characters that already exist and you write stories about them." I'm like, "That sounds cool." She said, "I wrote something. Can you read it for me? Would you be interested in beta reading it for me?" And I'm like, "Wha-" and so I read it and she gave me this ficlet. It was probably a couple thousand words long. It was Scully Mulder and it was their first kiss. And it was so cute and it was lovely. And I'm just like, "Oh my God, this is amazing. Thank you for sharing this with me." And she also introduced me to the big fic archives. And she's just like, "This is where I read. There are these other places too where they like sort by, by ship and by interest and by what kind of story it is. Is it angsty? Is it romance? Is it angsty romance? Is it her comfort?" So I started learning all of the fandom lingo through the X-Files fandom. And I never actually, well, okay, I never wrote an X-Files only story. I actually, one of my great unfinished magnum opus was an X-Files Harry Potter crossover. And my friend who introduced me to Harry Potter, she still bugs me and says, "Are you ever going to finish it?" I'm like, "Nope." And happily, so you really don't want me to finish it. So yeah, please don't go read that. It's the first thing I ever wrote and it's fairly cringe. And it's also unfinished, so it won't be satisfying in any way, I promise you.
Oh, gee.
But I did correctly predict that Snape and Dumbledore would both be dead in canon by the end of the books. Sorry, spoilers, but
Yeah.
yeah. So that exists. Like I said, it's findable, but don't do yourself a favor and pass that one by.
Don't go
But
searching for it.
yeah, I mean, you're welcome to, I guess, if you're a completist and or, have masochistic tendencies. But another thing that came out of that is I wrote a paper about fan fiction. I think it was my senior year. I was taking a class in storytelling, which kind of changed my life in a lot of ways, but that was also me introducing, one of the great storytellers in the United States to fan fiction. And I reached out to a bunch of X-Files authors that I really liked, and they very kindly consented to answer my questions. So I sent them interview questions and they wrote me back, and it was really awesome. So it was one of my earliest interactions with an online fandom, and it was so positive. But I also felt like I had an academic angle, so I could just reach out to them and have a legitimate reason to do so. Back when I first started writing Harry Potter fan fiction, I was really hesitant to reach out to people. And so it actually took me a while to get to know more people. I would participate in fic writing challenges over in the Yahoo groups sites. And it really wasn't until I hit LiveJournal and started, I think the great Severus Hermione exchange and the SSHD exchange. And that's where I really started meeting a lot of other writers in my ship. And that was amazing.
All right. When did you start writing fic?
Let's see. God, when was that? I first started posting to fanfiction.net in 2002, and that was sort of in the wake of Goblet of Fire, because that was really what got me interested in Snape, and it really got me interested in the Harry Potter fandom as a whole. And so that's how I found so over on Yahoo groups, the very first place I was Harry Potter for Grownups, HP4GU.
Oh,
And then I discovered Wicket when I Kissed the Teacher, which is the first Severus Hermione space that I really sort of reached out into. And that was fun. It was chaotic. It was a lot of people arguing over really random stuff of questionable relevance to the ship or the stories, but
mhm.
people online are going to talk about what they want to talk about.
That's so true.
But part of the reason I started writing fanfic at all was because I found stuff that I really, really meshed with personally. So I think it was Textual Sphinx's fault. She was the person that wrote Decoding the Heart, which was possibly the first, well, Decoding the Heart was the first like multi-chapter thing to really explode for in the Severus Hermione fandom. She also wrote, I think it was To Sever the Silver Lining from a Cloud. No, it was that one, but she also wrote basically a response to the very first Severus Hermione fic that was written by like a 12-year-old who has since taken it down, so it no longer exists, but that was back in 2000. And so Textual Sphinx wrote an alternate ending for that, and people started noticing that, and then she started writing the longer stories. And I love Decoding the Heart so much that when I basically wrote a parody of it, because the opening scene happens, they're at a cathedral, and Severus and Hermione are walking a labyrinth together, and they're observed by one of the priests at the cathedral, watching them and having thoughts about seeing the two of them do this meditative activity together. And so I basically rewrote that scene, only I set it at a corn maze in Indiana. And so that was my very first Severus Hermione story, which I posted in 2002. And, people were very kind about it. And especially people who are fans of Textual Sphinx already. They're like, okay, you have a definite point of view, girl.
Uh-huh.
And that sort of gave me permission to do more, which was good fun. And I started answering challenges over at the Wicket Yahoo group. And yeah, that sort of led to meeting other people and getting to know other fic writers. And there are some pretty cool people in that space. But I've never met Textual Sphinx, and sadly, Decoding the Heart was never finished. So if you're out there, we miss you. You can come back at any time.
Besides your Harry Potter stories, what other fandoms do you write for?
Ooh, I write a lot of Sherlock Holmes. So I've been obsessed with him since I think I was 10 or 11, because that's when I started reading the stories. And Jeremy Brett was playing Sherlock Holmes
Oh, yeah.
on Mystery.
I love him.
Me too. That's one thing that my dad and I really bonded over. We would always watch the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, and some of them, oh, Devil's Foot scared the crap out of me. It was so scary, and I loved it. And so I've been obsessed with Sherlock Holmes for a long time, and I can't remember exactly how I found the Holmestis exchange, but it happens in the summer and the winter. So Holmes plus solstice equals Holmestis, and it's for all Sherlock Holmes fandoms. So It can be, the BBC Granada series, which I fell in love with. It can be BBC Sherlock. It can be Great Mouse Detective. It can be comics. It can be anime. It can be, any series. I think there was a Russian series that was very popular. And so you can request and offer up stories in any of these areas. Oh, like Laurie R. King's The Beekeeper's Apprentice and sequels, her Mary Russell series. So,
Oh, I read all those.
oh, they're so good. I love them. And
Yes.
and so there will be people writing Mary Russell stories for this exchange. So also fun tie into Severus Hermione. One of the moderators is currently Vulgarweed, and Vulgarweed was an early supernova star of Severus Hermione. I'm not sure what their pronouns are, but I'll use she, I think. Yeah, she wrote Ravenous and sequels that was over on the Witch Fix site, which is sadly now no longer with us, but a lot of her stuff is still available. But Ravenous and sequels were a huge hit, some of my favorites. But Vulgarweed is now a moderator at Homestead, and I'm like, ah!
Oh, fun.
It's like, hi, I've been fangirling your stuff for decades. I'll try not to make it awkward. But yeah, so I read a lot in Sherlock Holmes. One of my earliest sort of I think it was, oh God, it was my first multi-chapter story was actually a crossover Sherlock Holmes and Harry Potter. So the Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes, because my headcanon is that Albus Dumbledore is partially the way he is because he met Sherlock Holmes in his youth. So, or
Oh,
when he was a young adult. So that is sort of the headcanon that I was writing with that. I made it a little overly complicated, but at the same time, it's like, no, this story still rules. I still like it. So it's always a nice thing. Yeah, I mean, if you write something you like, you're always going to have something to go back and read. So,
oh, absolutely.
so in addition to Sherlock Holmes, I've dabbled in Doctor Who and Alice in Wonderland and the MCU. Probably my most notable excursion outside of Harry Potter. For a while, it was before all the movies got really okay, maybe while the movies were in the process of getting horrible. I was really into the Pirates of the Caribbean. And Johnny Depp at the time, it was Johnny Depp. He had his fan base, but I was really, really into the character of Commodore Norrington, as played by Jack Davenport. And so I really got into the ship Sparrow Norrington. So I write Sparrington, and I've only written two fics, but one of them is the most popular thing I've ever written.
Oh,
So I've been, toiling in relative obscurity in Harry Potter, and I write this one multi-chapter Pirates of the Caribbean story, and it's the most popular in the ship on AO3. And I'm like, woo! Well, I'm glad, because it just combined a lot of my niche interests. Jack Davenport, Age of Sail stuff, naval warfare. I read a lot of Patrick O'Brian, which is something I haven't written fic in yet, but I sort of I sort of made a very Patrick O'Brian-ish Pirates of the Caribbean stories. So yeah, if you're in the mood for ripping seafaring yarns, that one, Naked to Mine Enemies, it's called. And like I said, I still like it. So
yeah. Yeah, I didn't finish it, but I enjoyed what I read. You have so much material that you've written.
oh gosh, I'm not super prolific. I've just been around forever.
Oh,
And none of my stories has really been like supernova, largely because I tend to write a lot of stories that really achieve superstar status tend to be quite long and they're posted as a work in progress. So people have a long time to talk about it. I mean, basically, works in progress for me sort of recreate what it was like when the books were coming out because you didn't know what was going to happen. You couldn't just sit down and binge them all, And the other cool thing is with works in progress, lots of times the author really enjoys interacting with their fans and like creates a whole culture and they answer questions, they talk about stuff, they give hints about what's to come. I mean, that's a really cool thing and occasionally enjoyed doing it with other people, but I found that really uncomfortable for myself. So I tend to write shorter things. I haven't posted a work in progress in 18 years. So I'm a little more private when it comes to interacting with fandom. I don't always answer reviews. I'm very bad about that. Sorry, everybody. I'm trying to get better, but sometimes I just get overwhelmed with real life stuff and then it just feels like this obligation. And I'm like, I'm not really interested in getting other people's input about where a story should go, and I've never written anything longer than like 65,000 words. So I'm not one of those people writing, 350,000 word epics. That's just not quite where I write. And also, since I answer a lot of challenges and write for fests, I don't have that much time to spend building something of that size and scope. And I love reading some of them, but some epics, I just feel like they go on too long and I lose interest. I get bored. And that's a me thing. That's not a criticism of anybody that writes longer stuff or writes serially, because that's a skill. And so many stories that I love were written that way. But for me personally, I'm a little more of a private person. I tend to only post completed works, and I like creating stuff on my own. That's just how I work, and that's just how I personally am controlling my interactions with fandom. Because again, minimizing drama, that doesn't mean I don't occasionally get flames from people that are really upset with something that I've written. But
Oh,
also, but also, I love AO3 because I can delete those things.
oh, that's true.
And I speak to a lot of writers who really sort of tie themselves in knots trying to say, well, this person could have a point. I'm like, no, that person is willfully misunderstanding because they have stuff that they haven't worked through on your own. You're not obligated to host their stupid opinions on in your online space. You can delete the review and
Mhm.
or even if you converse with them and discover that they are not arguing with you in good faith or have a total misunderstanding of what it is you've written, or are deciding to take something that you wrote personally, and it's just like, or my personal favorite, when they accuse the author of sharing the feelings of some of the despicable characters you're writing. I don't always write Lucius Malfoy in a complimentary way. And when he says something, if you think that's me expressing my opinion through Lucius Malfoy, no.
Get a grip.
And I've really had to be careful because I've had to add tags over at AO3 because there are people who will come up against like a pure-blooded microaggression and get really upset by that. And I'm like, it's Lucius Malfoy. It's like, what do you expect? But I do love Lucius, and I sometimes use him as an Oscar Wilde stand-in in my stories, and that's often very fun. But yeah, you can never.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this is me adjusting to AO3 in a different online culture because no space is going to be the same. And so I've been adding more tags. People who get really upset with how I portrayed Molly Weasley in one fic. It's just like, okay, fine, I'm adding a Molly Weasley bashing tag, so you're not going to be unpleasantly surprised. But I understand that time is precious and people don't want to commit to a fic and then discover it's got some squicky content. But there are some things I really think that there are people that are just so unadventurous in terms of starting a story. There are plenty of important things that one should tag for. Anything involving, sexual assault, non-consensual sexual contact, non-con and dub-con, any dead dove content, anything like that, absolutely tag for. But if you're gonna throw a hissy and, get all pissy in my feedback profile because I didn't write a secondary character how you see them, get over yourself, dude. Jeez. This is why this is why I've withdrawn so much. It's just like, ugh.
Oh, shoot.
And sometimes I'll engage with those people in good faith, but honestly, I don't have a whole lot of patience for it at this point in time, just because as my real life has gotten busier and busier, I have less time to help other people deal with their issues.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's a boundary I can set.
yeah. I know the story you're talking about. And well, she is very draconian. In the end, it comes out of why she's the way she is.
Yeah, and I'm using air quotes here, I like Molly Weasley, and I like what a lot of people do with her in stories. She's also very frequently, ever since when she read Rita Skeeter and then was passive aggressive to Hermione about the lies that Rita Skeeter told, I'm like, I don't like anybody that would do this to a child,
Right.
especially when I tend to be a little less sympathetic towards her in stories. I also, and this is a me thing, also not criticizing anybody that writes a different way, but as a person who is not a parent and has never wanted to be a parent, the whole idea that there's this special power that you can only access, this protective power that only parents can access, it's less interesting to me. And that's something that J.K. Rowling specifically wrote into the stories. And that's something that I know a lot of people who are parents find to be it comes from a true place. And this is not me trying to invalidate that. It's just, I don't have that reverence. So therefore, I'm willing to poke at it, to poke holes in it. So, yes, I am writing a Molly Weasley that is doing everything within her power to like bring her children into her sphere of influence and keep them there and basically play at happy families at the expense of their own personal launches and ability to be independent adults. I'm going to write that, and it's going to be hilarious, and I'm going to stage a huge food fight at her Christmas dinner, and I'm going to blow up the Christmas pudding, and I'm going to love
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
So, and also part of the reason that I wrote Molly Weasley that way is because Sarah Palin had recently come onto the political scene. And so I had this example of, the whole grizzly mama thing of this person who was trying to control everybody else's lives and cast it as love and trying to be everybody's grizzly mama. And I'm just like, I don't want this. And so that was another thing. So politics has always been something that I draw from, and annoyance about stuff often leaks into my fic. And Molly Weasley's portrayal in The Fine Art of Fine Print is 100% based on Sarah Palin, but also, it really didn't take a whole lot of twisting to make Molly Weasley into that. And I've had people say, I hate this. I've had people say, I hate it, but I love it. And other people got very offended by it. So sorry if you're offended, except not sorry. I've tagged for it now. You have no excuse.
Stop clutching your pearls. You wrote fic in the early days of the HP fandom while the books were still being written. What was that like?
It was so fun. I mean, I'm not saying it's not fun now, but it was a very particular kind of chaotic fun. And as a chaos Muppet, I thrive in that kind of thing. So, because everybody was arguing with everybody else, nobody knew what was going to happen. And there were people who went down with their ships. There are people that went down with their theories as the books would come out. And it was so much fun. Like back when I started reading Harry Potter fic, everybody was obsessed with the trio. So it was all like, is Harry going to end up with Hermione? Is Ron going to end up with Hermione? Is Draco going to end up with Hermione? So it was everybody obsessing over the kids. But then, I mean, at that point, the adult characters were largely drawn as caricatures. I mean, you had the mean uncle and aunt, you had the bully Snape, you had the defender McGonagall, you had wise old Albus Dumbledore, and all of the adult characters were largely unreliable, and especially as we saw in Chamber of Secrets. So the kids were the ones that were interesting. And then Goblet of Fire came out. And for me, the seminal scene in that is at the end when Snape rolls up his sleeve and shows Fudge his dark mark, because that's where we realize that he is willing to take personal heat and have people judge him in the service of truth. And then Fudge still doesn't believe it and he leaves. And Dumbledore's like, Severus, you know what I must ask you to do. And I'm like, oh my God, Snape is a good guy. And he's terrible, but he's a good guy. Ah! And that's why I really think that the Snape fandom just completely exploded like right around 2000. That's where we got our first Severus Hermione stories. That's when people really started writing about Snape because he was suddenly so much more interesting as a character. But I mean, there was some ridiculous stuff too, because people at the time assumed that Snape was a pureblood and was from this old pure-blooded family. And so we had all the Regency challenge and all the like Lord Snape things and all the, Hermione is this blue stocking trying to, My Fair Lady, Pride and Prejudice, like all of these tropes were just feeding into the whole Snape thing because there was still so much we didn't know, but so much that we thought was really interesting and trying to make predictions. But it wasn't just about that. It was also about trying to find an explanation for why he is the way he is. And he ain't perfect by any stretch. And that's part of the reason we're so interested in him.
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing that was kind of interesting at the time is that when a story was written, like between books and also between films, influenced a lot of what they were writing. So one of my favorite examples, so I stopped reading Severus Hermione fic and then came back to it. And I'm like, why is everybody writing about Bella carving mudblood into Hermione's arm? It's just like, that was never in the fandom before. Why is it such a thing now? And the answer is, it was in the film. it was not in the books, and a lot of people don't even realize that because it's such a popular thing to deal with. Like Senyan Lu's "Do Not Go Gentle" is one of the what a writer.
Mhm.
Also, someone interviewed on this podcast, yay! But or someone whose work has been featured on this podcast, I should say.
Yeah.
But oh, yeah. So that story is all about how Mudblood was carved in a cursed knife and it's killing Hermione. And that was such an influential fic that basically it's everywhere. And it's almost a thing that you have to address in your story because otherwise people will wonder, well, why isn't this an issue? And so it's that kind of thing that we were free from in the early days because you could make up whatever shit you want because the stories weren't done. You could pair any character with any character without having to give an in-story explanation for why we didn't have to kill off Ron Weasley before Hermione was canon, or I mean, obviously you don't always kill off Ron. Sometimes he's a friend, sometimes he's supportive, sometimes they just drift away from each other, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, but it's still a decision that a writer has to make when they're writing a Severus Hermione story. Now that all the books are done, now that all the films are done, and there was a lot less friction, and people are no less creative, and people are still writing stories where Ron and Hermione never got together, and that's fantastic. But you have to characterize it as an AU. In the before times, all you had to say was, this was written before Deathly Hallows came out, and everyone would be fine with it. But, if you weren't there at the time, there's not always that sensitivity to what we knew when.
Right.
And also, we had a lot more freedom to cast our own Snape before the films started coming out. I mean, Alan Rickman is fantastic. I love Alan Rickman, but really, my Snape doesn't look that much like him. He sounds a lot like him, but my Snape always looked a little more like Adrian Brody. But, to each their own. So there's less friction in describing, how they dress because there weren't the costumes that existed. And so people are no less creative now, but you have to make allowances for what exists now. And that's fine. It's just different. But at the time, I mean, God, I was quite young in fandom, and I was in my early 20s in the early aughts. So I had a lot more energy to debate. I had a lot, so I spent a lot of time over at oh God, what was that? Over in Fiction Alley Park and in the Harry Potter for Grown-ups Yahoo group. And so those were places I would have my opinions and I would fight people for them. And I found that really fun. I mean, nowadays I prefer to reserve my energy for the fights that I think are important. But for example, I was really involved in the debate as to whether Blaise Zabini was a girl or a boy, because there was a super popular story, what was it, Pond de Queen, that featured prominently Blaise Zabini as a girl. And she had a very important role in that story. And I was like, okay, I'll read this story and stuff, but why on earth would you think someone named Blaise is a girl, given how all the other names in the story is like? I mean, I didn't fight with her because I don't do that anymore. We all have regrets about how we behaved in our early fandom days, and that informs how we are fandom now, and that's a good thing. But yeah, oh my gosh, I got in so many fights with people over at Fiction Alley Park. I was obviously he's a boy, and so when that was finally solved in canon, I'm like, thank you, thank you. I'm trying to think. There were very few things that I was very certain about in those days, and that was one of them. Also, that Snape was a good guy, and so after the events of Half-Blood Prince, I'm like, okay, so what's the angle? Yes, we know this happened, but we don't know why, and I guarantee there's an important why. And that's when sort of pro and anti-Snape people started parting ways a little bit, and it was pretty wild. So good times. But yeah, and when people started pulling apart, that's when you started seeing a little more division, and people surrounding themselves with like-minded people and people needing to curate their spaces a little bit and stepping away from the general space.
Mhm.
And that's sort of continued. A lot of it is platform based because the platforms have shifted. I never really invested in Tumblr in my presence in Tumblr just because that was when the very, very toxic Sherlock fandom was imploding. And I'm just like, these microblogging sites are not really set up to foster complicated, nuanced conversation. It's just people posting gotcha takes and reblogging and reblogging and reblogging. So the conversations there tend to be very fractured unless you're writing like an essay and people are sharing that. And that's just like, well, that's why we have LiveJournal. That's why we have Dreamwidth. That's why we have these places. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, if you go viral on Tumblr, it's like 50% likely to be absolutely horrible for you. And, people were getting
Oh,
doxxed. People were accusing one another of being rapists on the basis that they were having the wrong person top in the relationship. I mean, it was awful. And I'm just like, thanks. I think I'm not going to be in this space. And,
uh-huh.
that was a choice that I made, and I'm at peace with that. And I'm still every now and then I'll log in just to see what's going on, but mostly I realized that that was not a space that I was interested in investing a lot of time and energy in.
Yeah. Actually, Tumblr was the first time I started interacting with fandom.
Mm. So I bet so I imagine your experience is completely different from mine, and I'm fascinated by that. I kind of want to interview you now.
Oh gosh. But I have I call it a reblog because I just pretty much anything Snape-ish I come across, I reblog. Except I try to keep it not too negative. And since I go off notifications, I'm not running into a lot of hate or arguments and stuff like that.
That makes me happy. And also, I mean, you're a what you see. It sounds like you're running a what you see is what you get kind of space.
Mm-hmm.
That, so people know what they're getting into. I mean, but
Yeah,
if you're a person that's writing in multiple fandoms, if you're a person that writes in multiple ships, some slash, some het, if you're writing, same age versus cross gen, I mean, if you're in a lot of different spaces, there's a lot of opportunity to like for people to be unpleasantly surprised by opinions you hold. So that's another part of the reason that I'm like, maybe
yeah.
maybe I'll just be me in other places. But oh,
And there are a lot of people who think that they can either convince you why you're wrong or take you to task over it.
that's so tiresome. I mean, who do they think
It
they
is.
are?
Uh, I don't know how anybody has energy for that sort of thing.
And, and from my own personal experience, I was a lot more combative and looking and spoiling for a fight when I was younger. And when you've got a fandom that has a lot of younger fans in it, and that's I guess part of the reason why I was so drawn to sort of the Severus Hermione space is because I mean, I was the rarity because most people that were writing in this space were far older than I was. There were a handful of other people who were my age and younger, but of course, my age has continued to go up as as the membership of the ship has shifted, and I'm in a different role now than I was then, and I can share cringeworthy stories of me being a jerk to an author and them not continuing the fic to argue in favor of never leaving negative comments unless they are specifically asked for.
Right.
All of my stories now have a disclaimer on it that said, this is a completed work written for a specific person or a specific prompt. Concrete is not being requested. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had some people take exception with that, but then it's just, or give me concrete in spite of it. And then I just point up and I'm like,
See the sign?
yeah, tap on the sign. And they're like, oh, I didn't see that. And then they continue to argue with me. I'm like, deleted. So yeah, I mean, oh gosh, that's been reminding people that, this is hobby writing that you were getting for free when you were entitled to a fanfic author. That makes them not want to give you more stuff.
Exactly.
I was such an idiot, and past me was not always very well behaved. I'm going to name names. There is a writer that I loved, whose works I loved, goes by Shelley Bean over on FFN, and I loved their work. They started writing a Severus Hermione story that featured the sport that I did in college. So, and I was thrilled. I was so excited, and but because in my enthusiasm, I went over and said, "Hey, I used to do this sport in college. I would love to beta read for you. I would love to provide additional feedback so it can be, I don't know, I can't bring myself to go back and reread it, but it does exist, and it's just, read my comment. But I'm sure it read to them like this is super inaccurate and it needs to be more of a certain way." When they were probably just writing it because they're like, I think this looks really cool and I'm just going to write it the way that I want to. I was insisting that this author write a thing the way that I wanted to read it. And now that I have more fic writing experience of my own, I'm like, that was a massively jerky thing to do, entitled, and Shelley Bean abandoned the fic.
Oh no.
Never got another, and to this day, I feel awful about that. So, Shelly Bean, if you're listening, I'm sorry I sucked. I'm sorry I made you feel that you needed to write in a certain way or felt judged for writing about a thing that you thought was fun and weren't taking seriously, because it doesn't have to be serious. It's fanfic. You can write whatever the heck you want and however the heck you want. And yeah, and so I'm sorry that I did that to someone else, but also I'm really glad that I have that story to tell other people. Don't be a jerk. Don't offer concrete if it's not requested. And, your own preferences do not obligate anybody else to write the story that I want to read.
Right.
I still feel bad about that. And I've been told you can let it go. It was 20 years ago. And I'm like, yeah, okay. But if it keeps me from being a jerk to someone else in fandom, then that's good. It's good to live with knowledge of one's own bad behavior, and because it'll remind you to try and be better. And that's a thing that I try to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. You said that fandom is the same as it ever was, just more siloed and less fractured by reblogging.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. That goes back to like why I stepped away from Tumblr, just because people migrated to Tumblr while LiveJournal was still a thing. And so we were losing a lot of people to Tumblr. So, and that's fine. I'm really happy in some spaces and other people are really happy in other spaces. But
Mm-hmm.
what Tumblr was set up to do was boost virality, like things
Mm-hmm.
going viral and to make it as easy to share content as possible. But again, that was not really conducive to the kind of in-depth conversations that I was interested in having with people. It tended to amplify gotcha takes. It tended to, you know, I make a statement, someone else responds to it, and someone else responds to the response.
Mm-hmm.
Any one of those things, the post, the response to the response, any one of those things can at any time be reblogged by others to start an entirely new conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what was happening a lot. So you were having, perhaps a nuanced conversation happening between three people, but then people were reading that and sharing different bits of it and starting their own conversations so that the original poster and the commenters weren't necessarily able to keep up with all the conversations. You can't keep responding to things in 5 different places, and it just tended to go
Yeah.
explodey. And then people would just take a screenshot of the thing that they liked and share that elsewhere, and then there would be other conversations about it. So the original poster really only has so much control over the conversation that they start. And whereas on a traditional blogging platform, the whole conversation happens on your post. And it's a lot easier to control that. So, and also I tended to see people going viral for the wrong reasons. People mocking the
Oh,
crap out of someone or having a good point, but then there's no way for the original poster to really respond to that. And so sharing of screenshots of conversations, you know, all of that was just like, this strikes me as more chaotic than this chaos Muppet is comfortable with. So, maybe I'm both Bert and Ernie in my own way.
oh.
But yeah, so most people were using it as a chance to talk to their friends about stuff rather than engage with the original poster. And that was really not what I was interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing it even more so, or at least as much as in video and visual image specific platforms like TikTok and Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Some conversations are happening on the original post, but you've got people sharing things as reels and making comments on it. So they're using the original person's content to start their own conversation with other people,
Right.
but not really inviting interaction with the original person. So that's just kind of how it works, but it tends to be why I'm more interested in places where I have a little more, not so much control, but where I can stay on top of what's being said, where I can stay
Uh-huh.
informed and people aren't showing up, to dogpile me based on some bad faith interpretation of something that I've said.
Right.
I've only ever had that happen once, and that was because I wrote a story that had a very similar title to a story written by someone else. One of those person's fangirls saw this and got offended and thought that I'd stolen the title from this other person, and basically she instigated all of her friends to come and flame my work. And the other author basically had to call her fangirls off and told them to stop flaming me, but it was someone in another ship, and we were able to jump on that pretty quickly. Unfortunately, it was at fanfiction.net where you can't delete signed reviews, but at least
Oh, yeah.
at least the instigator came over and gave me an apology, but I mean, that's, again, that's a thing that still exists in my feedback profile because on that platform, you can't delete signed reviews. So makes me like AO3 a lot better, but most of us do.
Mhm.
Although it has sort of enabled this sort of, if you don't tag for certain content, I'm not going to read your story. It's just like, this is how I find stories. So if you're not tagging for this very specific content that I'm looking for, then, it can be harder.
Mhm.
I think readers are conditioned to expect you to do things that, people who started writing in different spaces don't necessarily know to do for. So that's one thing I've been really grateful for the Discord because we're having these conversations. It's just like, this is what, and then tags change. Like, they're tag wranglers over AO3 that are just like, okay, this is the tag that we're now using, and we're going to migrate all uses of things similar to that and slowly like retag things. But that, of course, it was a massive project. But it's just like, people don't use hurt comfort as much anymore. I mean, that used to be a very popular genre, or in X-Files, we called it Mulder torture, and, but it was a very specific kind of, very fandom specific thing. So
Mhm.
I don't know that I'll ever stay on top of whatever the current trends in tagging are, but at least I have people to ask now, which is really helpful.
Good. Most of your stories are written as gifts and or from prompts from various fests.
Mhm.
Which is more important to you, the challenge or the community?
I love this question so much. I love it. So it's kind of a chicken or an egg kind of situation for me. In order to know about a fest, I need to somehow be connected with someone who's involved in it, whether as an organizer or a participant or a booster, someone who reads at this fest already and knows, and that's why they're amplifying it, a cheerleader. So I need to know someone who can tell me about it because I don't often go out looking for things to write for. I'm trying to remember the name of the community, but there are a couple of communities on Dreamwidth that basically exist to share information whenever there's a fest. And so I get lots of information for things I'm not at all interested in writing, like fandoms, or there was a female character specific Dead Dove Fest. And I'm like, I think I'll give that one a pass, but I'm really happy that this exists. Because a lot of people work through their trauma by writing fanfic. I mean, I know I certainly did. So it's really good that we have these spaces that are safe to write about really squicky content and, to read the really squicky content, because I know a lot of folks who are helped by that, even if it's obviously not stuff that they want to encounter real life, but some of us have anyway. So, but yeah, so chicken or egg again, I have to know someone involved. So there has to be some sort of community connection. But the reason I've participated in so many fests over the years is because I really love writing to prompts. I like seeing that someone has the seed of a story that they want to read and being able to make that into a reality, but also to put my particular spin on it. And for Anonymous Fests, I love those because I have found so many people whose works I have never read, but I love what they wrote for the fest. So I go off and I read all of their stuff and fangirl the crap out of them and tell them, I love your work. This is so great. I love the way you write these characters. This made me laugh so hard. This made me cry so hard. I just love it because I get to meet people that way and find new stuff that I write. I mean, literally, the very first Severus Hermione person that I met was Bamboo. And she also said, "Oh, yeah, and Lilith J is also in town. Do you all three of us want to get together?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." Bamboo, who wrote some of my favorite stories, Lilith J, who is also on Witchfix and, an incredible writer. And, the three of us got together and we had dinner because we were like, well, in case we don't hit it off, we can have dinner and then just go our separate ways. We all ended up retiring back to my apartment where we sat and just talked until, God, we talked until the wee hours. And it was just amazing, just to so those are my earliest people that I met, and two like huge name writers, and I was just this little person with two or three fics under my belt at that point, but I got to know them through various fests. And it was such a joy to be making work alongside some of my favorite writers, at the same time. We're all going through this together. So writing for other people and writing with other people is a great way to build community. And reading works at the same time, reading new works at the same time as everyone else is really cool. Also, if you're writing for a themed fest, a not small thing is that you've got a built-in friendly audience of people who are also writers and of people who already know and like the stuff that you're interested in. So, even if someone has been reading and writing Harry Potter fic for 20 years, there's no guarantee that they will have ever come across any writer that I've read or any story that I've read just because the space is so huge. But yeah, so having a built-in audience and guaranteed 3 to 10 reviews is pretty cool. So,
Yeah. Yeah, feedback is nice.
yeah, and I mean, I really am writing for myself. If I'm writing something, it's a story that I want to read. And this is probably weird and or egocentric of me, but sometimes I go back and read my own stories to cheer myself up if I'm having a hard time, or I go back to where it originally posted on the Severus Hermione Fest and read comments that were left like 13 years ago from people that have since left fandom, and it just fills me with warm fuzzies. It's nice to have that to go back to if I need it, but mostly when I'm writing, it's a solitary activity, but there are people that I will reach out to and say, "Why would he do this in this situation?" And they can say, "Maybe this." I'm like, "I like that idea. I'm not going to use it, but it gave me another idea, so I'm going to write that. Thank you." So yeah, there's definitely community even among people that aren't necessarily in the same ship or writing the same kinds of stories that you write, but as long as there's like a base knowledge and they know who the characters are, they can tell you if something is not going to work or not.
Uh, what are some of the fests that you've participated in recently?
Let's see. I did sort of stop writing Harry Potter fic for a space of about 4 or 5 years. But while that was happening, I was writing in Sherlock Holmes. So I was writing Arthur Conan Doyle stories. So for Holmes, I got to do sort of a fix-it fic for the Jeremy Brett version of the Six Napoleons. And one thing that's kind of cool about that, the mysterious woman at the center of it was played by Marina Sirtis, who went on to play Deanna Troi in Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Right.
And so when I found this, I'm like, "Oh, there's gonna be some Easter eggs in this." And so I ended up pairing her off with a character whose last name was Troy
Oh,
and had them go off at the end. And of course, only someone that had seen the BBC Granada version and not necessarily read the story by itself, they might not necessarily get that. I think I edited in an author's note just so I can say, "Hey, let me share this cool thing," or, writing a Doctor Who story. And it's just like, "Hey, did you know that I wrote a Doctor Who Sherlock crossover. And based on the fact that the graveyard where you see the weeping angels is the same graveyard where they shot Sherlock's ersatz funeral in BBC Sherlock. So I had Sherlock encounter a weeping angel, and yeah, so that was good fun, and sent him back in time.
mm,
So yeah, I've been writing for Homestis the whole time, and it's been fun. I wrote my very first Great Mouse Detectives fic.
oh, fun.
I had to rewatch the movie, and I told Mr. 42 that I'd be watching it with my ship goggles on because my recipient wanted Radigan paired with Basil of Baker Street. And I'm like, "Okay, let's see what we've got here." But we're watching it, and he just looks at me and goes, "It's not even subtle, is it?" I'm like, "Nope." So I got to write that, entirely new to me, and it was really fun. I also made some art for that. I almost never do art, but I did for Homestis. And on the Harry Potter side, again, joining that Hearts and Cauldrons Discord server has just been like game changing for me because it made me want to write Severus Hermione again. And with the people I was interacting with, there were some people that I'd never read and some people that I fangirled, and I got to tell, "Oh my God, reading your stories got me wanting to write in this fandom again. So thank you for that." And it's just been really nice. So I participated in their Spring Fever Fest, and I did a retelling of Rumpelstiltskin, and I'm currently writing for the Winter Gift Fest. I can't say anything about it for for fear of rousing maudly wrath or spoiling any surprises, but I'm having a lot of fun with that as well. The prompts that I got were just like, "I don't know why I'm going to write this, but I'll figure it out as I'm writing. Here we go."
Uh-huh.
And for other writing, this isn't a fic thing, or rather, it's not a fanfic thing, but there's a really wonderful speculative fiction writing workshop called Clarion. And their sort of flagship thing is a 6-week residency, which I've been too scared to try and do just because I can't take 6 weeks off of work if it's not for a medical reason. So,
Uh-huh.
but it has been something I've had my eye on. But their sort of Clarion West does a lot of online workshops and stuff like that. So I did a flash fiction workshop last summer. It was amazing. I had such a good experience. And basically, they give you little lessons, they give you an assignments, and they assign you to a feedback group. And your job is to read and comment on their stories. And it was such a great thing. I think it was all of $25 to do. If anyone is interested in doing something like that, I cannot recommend Clarion West highly enough. It was such a cool thing. And they also have Discord servers, so it's also sort of facilitated by Discord. So honestly, getting to know that platform has been really transformative for me, both in terms of writing OFIC and in terms of writing fanfic. That's been very cool. Apparently, I've missed it, so it's good to be there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we'll have to add a link to our additional reading page
Oh, yes, please. Thank you. I'll try to remember to do that.
where Mundungus's work will also be linked.
Yay.
Yay. How did you come up with Mundungus42?
So going back to the active canon days, there were a lot of people who were using the name Ginny Weasley. There were lots of people using Hermione. There were lots of people using the kid characters. And I'm just like, okay, what's a character whose name is in the books, but we have no idea who this person is? And so that's how I landed on Mundungus Fletcher. I think there were like two references to him in canon at the time that I chose it. And neither of them was complimentary, but like he did some sketchy thing, or then he was trying to claim that he lost a tent when I know for a fact that he was sleeping under, basically like a lean-to. Like he was obviously a bit of a grifter, and his name, Mundungus, is based on the Spanish word mondongo, which is it's either Spanish or Portuguese. Forgive me for not being able to remember. It's been a while. But yeah, it's smelly tobacco of low or inferior quality.
Oh,
And so I'm like, okay, that sounds kind of fun. I like that. And the other thing is that there were lots of people who had very obviously gendered names. And at the end, I grew up during the internet time. If you had a feminine sounding name, you were going to attract the attention of all these creepy people. And they were, back in the AOL and various other chat things, it's just like age, sex, location. I'm like, go away. For a while, I was very like, oh, I'm this, this, and this. But then I just found out that naming, as a young woman online, I was always going to be potentially targeted by people. So another attraction of Mundungus is that it was male coded, but also, again, we didn't know much about Mundungus Fletcher. So he was a cipher at the time, a cipher and a bit of a shit stirrer. And I'm like, okay, that's good. So that's how I got Mundungus. And the 42 is from Douglas Adams's
oh,
Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where 42 is the
yes.
answer to the question of the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. So I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
that sounds good. Mundungus 42.
Oh, I like that.
The other thing that's kind of funny is that my author pick is, I always call it the duh pumpkin, which probably isn't the nicest thing to call it, but yeah, so it's a jack-o'-lantern with big carved teeth and kind of cross-eyed. And that was actually a pumpkin that I carved, and that was the year that we waited too long to buy our pumpkins for jack-o'-lanterns. So all that were left was like tiny little squashes and like actual pie pumpkins with very thick walls, so they're not great for carving jack-o'-lanterns. So I actually carved that pumpkin, and that has been my avatar ever since. And I make jokes about it only being seasonally appropriate during Halloween, but the rest of the year I much prefer to be seasonally inappropriate. So yeah, we'll just call it consistent branding and not laziness.
You don't have to be seasonally appropriate.
It's overrated and a lot of work.
Mhm.
So that's the woman who's had her Christmas tree up for over a year now.
Oh, well, that's good timing.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, it's now becoming seasonally appropriate. I'm sure people are going to come over to my house and say, "Gosh, you have your Christmas tree up already." It's like, yeah, already. But we started doing that during the pandemic just because we needed some light and we needed some things that made us smile. So we decided to leave it up. And we did take it down for about a 6-month period, but now it's back up again and it's been up for over a year. So yeah, or just about a year. So it'll probably stay up till at least February, and then we'll make a decision as to whether or not it still gives us joy. And if it does, it'll stay. And if not, we'll put it away and wait till we need some joy. But honestly, it's probably going to stay up.
Yeah.
But it's got a lot of things on it that make us happy. They've got little Harry Potter ornaments. We've got Star Wars ornaments. We've got, really pretty things that people give us and really silly things that people gave us. Probably my favorite, a friend of mine who does wood carving made these beautiful snowflakes that have 2020 in the center and the word fuck radiating outward as the arms. So it's a fuck 2020 ornament.
I think sources of joy are something we should all consider spending more time thinking about.
Here, here, there are some things that are out of our control, but having things around us that give us joy and make us feel better is something that we can control. So, well, for the most part. So,
Yeah, absolutely. You write so well in so many different subgenres,
thank you.
like adventure, mystery, humor, poetry's almost always romance. How do you decide what shape a story will take?
Oh gosh, this isn't perhaps great, but mostly I get impatient with myself if I feel I'm writing something that I've already written before.
Oh,
So so if I have the opportunity to like branch into something new and unusual, well, sort of like with the Great Mouse Detective fic, it's like I'd never written that. I've never written in that fandom. I'd never written that ship. I hadn't really thought about the characters in that way. Okay, let's see what happens.
uh-huh.
And so if I can dive into something that I haven't done before or write a character in a new way, that interests me and keeps me engaged. And other times I get assigned to write prompts that are really squicky. And then I'm like, okay, how can I fulfill the letter of this prompt while completely subverting the heck out of the spirit? Like sometimes if there's a compulsive aspect, I find that really gross to write for me,
Mhm.
but only in certain ships. Like I had one that had a compulsive element and I completely subverted it and made it into something not compulsive, but still sort of gave the kind of I layered deception into it so that there's a manipulative aspect, but without the compulsion, which I wasn't interested in writing. So that kind of things. So writing for prompts a lot can sometimes spur me either in a positive or negative direction. So the prompt can often send me catapulting in a forward or a backward direction. Other times, some prompts are just, I know immediately what they are. And that's fun. I sort of get the vibe immediately. Like Snape, Hermione, Murder on the Orient Express. Of course, I know how I'm going to write that. It's just like, let's go. Or Snape and Luna, steampunk pixie conspiracies. Great. It's going to be like half Snow Crash and half like Doctor Strangelove. That's exactly what I'm going to write. Sometimes I immediately get an idea. Sometimes I have to wander in the wilderness a bit before I know exactly what it's going to be. But usually the opening, the like first scenes are the hardest for me because like deciding where to start the story is, I mean, because your first scene has to basically contain all the elements of your story, even if people don't realize that it does, because, a lot of that gets revealed later. But yeah, deciding where to start a story is, because you have to tell the reader what it is that they're in for, even if you're not tipping your hand completely about all the plot elements. But the vibe has to be there from the start. And if you don't know what the vibe's going to be, then that opening is going to shift a bunch. And that's just, but once the opening scene is right, then the rest of it will follow, at least for me. And also, that opening, also, you have to know in your head exactly what role your characters are going to fill in this story. And once I figure out those things, then and what they want, I tend not to analyze it too much when I'm writing, but I have to be like, okay, where is this person when the story starts? And where do I want them to be when the story ends? And so I've got the plot in mind, but I also need to be thinking about the character arcs. And once I know those things, where I'm starting and who my characters are, then then it gets fun. But sometimes it can be a slog to get there.
We talked a little bit about Potter Watch. You also
Yeah.
do, is it Irwa or
Yeah.
ERWA?
Yeah,
I
or
don't want
what?
to, I don't want to spew it.
Yeah, I usually call it Irwa. I mean, just because. So I arrived at Irwa because, as with my fic writing, I am what the oatmeal calls a garbage fondue fountain, is in like I have tons of ideas and most of them are awful. But if there's one that I particularly glom onto and I really want to do it, but my bandmates are either too busy or it's a little too ridiculous for them to want to do, then I'll do it myself, usually. And I'm like, okay, so I need a solo wizard rocker name. It's just like, well, I'm in Potter Watch, so, and I'm one third of Potter Watch because there are three of us. So I just basically took one third of the letters of Potter Watch in the middle. So I've told my bandmates that if they want to make wizard solo projects, one of them has to be Pot and the other has to be TCH. So I'm Urwa, Pot, and TCH. Lead singer has claimed TCH because it sounds kind of like THC, and that feels like a decent vibe to make wizarding reggae. So, but we'll see. But yeah, so the whole reason that Urwa came about is so as a writer, one of my superpowers is writing rhyming verse. So I can write it about anything. Real Me had like a year-long verse writing project that I pulled off and published under my real name. And so most people who know me in real life know that if they need a lyric or a rhyme or anything like that, they can come to me. And that's sort of how I ended up getting recruited to Potter Watch. And I've also, written song parodies. Oh, fun fact. So if you're a Severus Hermione reader, you've probably come across the very excellent epic fic called Pet Project.
Oh, yes.
So I was friends with the author on LiveJournal, and she posted asking if someone could write a Sorting Hat song for her because she's just like, I'm not really confident in my rhyming. And so I said, why, yes, I can do this. And so we emailed a little bit, and she told me what she wanted to be in the Sorting Hat song, like how it was going to advance the plot, what details needed to be in it, the general vibe. And so I wrote that for her, and she used every word of it. And it is, so I have written 0.0000001% of that story. So getting words included in one of my favorite fics of all time, it was just like, okay, that is the coolest thing.
That is so cool. Yeah.
But having this rhyming thing is how I ended up as part of Potter Watch. And let's see, so mostly as Urwa, I do parodies of songs. I think I've only done one original song as Urwa, and this is notable, as being separate from Potter Watch, because Potter Watch, we write all of our own music. So, and we've an album out. It's really cool. We're very proud of it. But my one sort of Snape-centric song was done as Urwa, and that was there's a wonderful wizard rocker by the name of Totally Knuts, and one of Potter Watch's first projects was making a song for a sea shanty compilation that TK organized. And I am obsessed with sea shanties, again, back to my special interest, which is Age of Sail.
Oh.
And so I said, y'all, we have to do a sea shanty. So we wrote one it was very Victor Crumb centric, and it was all about the galleon that they sail from Durmstrang that comes up in the middle of the Hogwarts Lake. So it's all about that. But we kind of pooped out when the third shanty compilation came along. The guys didn't have enough time to do it. So I basically said, I want to do a separate project by myself as Urwa. So I did Tune of Holloway Joe, and it's all about detention with Snape. And there's only the slightest nod to my OTP in it. And that's just basically like the punchline, because it lists all the terrible things that Snape has students do for detention. And I think the last one is, for 7 years did Severus Snape creatively torment us. And that is how I qualified to be his new apprentice. Yay. So yeah, I do very silly things with Urwa. I wrote an entire song about noses, because that's what you do. It was based on the joke, what is the power that Harry has that the Dark Lord knows not? A nose! Ha ha ha! But then we started calling it the power the Dark Lord knows not. So I wrote an entire song about that. It's terrible, and I love it.
That's fun.
So anything too shameless for Potter Watch and or a parody gets done as Urwa. So both Potter Watch and Urwa, ERWA, and I think it's like even Urwa42 are both on Bandcamp. So if you're morbidly curious, that's where they live.
We'll have some links there too.
Yeah, and the other thing about detention with Snape, I should give you a heads up. I didn't know how to make a click track, so the rhythm is a little wonky, and I figured out how to make a click track after that. And I'm like, okay, the next time so all my future a cappella things, are a lot easier, a lot more rhythmically steady. We'll just say that.
Well, it's enjoyable either way, and
thank you.
We'll be playing that on our next Snape and Music episode next May.
I think there's a lot of space for Potter Watch to go in terms of Snape content, just because we've sort of held ourselves back a bit because we're trying to be in the activist space, but also our lead singer, Rowan, is super into Snape as well. But he's more of a snilly person, which is fine. I mean, I have read I've read a bit of that.
Oh, yes.
I read much more widely than my OTP. So, and that's good fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of good fic out there, a lot of good writers.
Hmm. And they're in every ship. It's intimidating, but so exciting.
Yeah. Well, I think you're among them, so
Oh, you're very kind to say that. Thank you. I know I've been sort of cloistered in my little corner, and it's a good place, but I'm always happy when anyone finds my stories and they like them. And any way that happens, I think is great.
yeah.
So thank you. So thank you in particular for hosting me on this, because if people are like, how can this person have been writing for 20 years and I've never heard of them? Well, if that makes them interested in reading my stuff, yay! Thank you.
Yay. Yeah, actually, Zigadinus recommended you to me.
Thank you, Zig. You're amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, ink stains, their big
Oh,
work in progress is one of the best things I've read. Oh, they're just amazing.
oh yeah. What brought you to Snape?
Definitely that moment in Goblet of Fire with the revelation of what the dark mark was, what it meant that he had one, what he meant that it was growing darker, what he meant that he was willing to show it to someone like Fudge, who, yes, is Minister for Magic, but is also obviously not a safe person, an last ditch attempt to get him to see reason. I mean, whoa, that's impressive. And the other thing that's because Hermione was present at that scene, that sort of gave me permission because as like the brains of the trio, it's like she would have seen that and had exactly the same reaction that a lot of us did, realizing that he wasn't just this mean teacher who, made fun of her teeth and was just bullied Neville and, was always horribly mean to Harry and stuff like that. These people that she cared about and protected, but also realizing, yes, he may be horrible in person, but this is a person who is on your side and who may not be safe for certain kind of interactions, but you can rely upon to keep you safe. And that was pretty cool. So Goblet of Fire came out in 2000. I don't think it's any kind of coincidence that the first Severus Hermione fics were also written in 2000. I think Textual Sphinx started writing because it came out in the summer, and so like in the fall, that's when I started really finding interesting Snape fic to read. And I was interested in a lot of different things. There's the fanon concept of the dark revel became like that was the thing that a lot of people were writing about. How someone could keep focused on the good things while all this depravity and horrible things were happening around you. And that's something I found very compelling and interesting. And we got later on, in Deathly Hallows, but my soul Dumbledore, mine, it's like, and it was very validating to read those bits in Deathly Hallows, seeing everything from Snape's perspective in The Prince's Tale. So because a lot of us felt so validated that yes, this is the person that we have invested all of this emotional time in, and we're getting the payoff that we wanted. Less so with the scene with Nagini, but we were all resurrecting him within months of his demise.
Ah, yes.
It's just like, come on, tell me a person who on the first time we meet him says that he can put a stopper in death. Tell me he's not going to put a stopper in death. Chekhov would know that this is the case. So
Mhm. Yes. So many of your fics feature Snape and Hermione. Are they your OTP?
they are. I have written some. I've paired her with other people. I've paired Snape with other people, but I keep coming back to Severus Hermione. For me, the characters are endlessly versatile. You can write them in just about any context, in any profession, just because they're both very smart characters with somewhat opposite ways of approaching a problem, but they're both exceedingly competent. I have a bit of a competence kink, so I enjoy seeing people do stuff really well. And I find that, and so, when you've got a guy who, when he's in school, he's inventing his own spells, he's improving on the textbook in his chosen field. I mean, that's a pretty clever guy. And then you've got Hermione, who is like brewing these impossible potions successfully and answering logic problems that, were set up to stump adults. I mean, you've got two very bright characters who I think have a lot of commonalities. One of the other things that I think that they both have is a ruthless practicality.
Yes.
They're both of them willing to do somewhat sketchy things in service of greater goals. And that's something, when I first started writing, I was sort of drawn to Hermione's can-do attitude. But as I've gotten older, I've also become really interested in what it means that she is so ruthless. And if there are situations in which she could becomes sort of disconnected from her moral compass, or it's harder for her to remember what they're fighting for, what would that look like? And also, what would it look like if Severus had something that would help him heal? What would that look like? And so, in my 20 plus years of writing these characters, I've tried to come at them from a lot of different angles and put them in a lot of different situations. And so what makes them so much fun to write is that they're both of them pretty complicated characters who, particularly because we really only saw Hermione as a kid. And just imagining what is that precocious person going to grow into?
Yes.
That was a question that interested me a little bit when I was a young adult, but interests me a lot more as an older person. It's like, well, what if she encountered all of these roadblocks and she really doesn't have this impressive future that everybody envisioned for her? What's she going to be like as a result? These are all very interesting questions that we can ask because we've got these characters with such widely differing childhoods, but who share some pretty interesting and variable core traits that can be explored in a lot of different ways. So yeah, I keep coming back. I can't quit them. It's been 20 years and I still haven't run out of things to say.
That's wonderful.
It really is. What a cool place to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't once been tempted to kill them both, although I've done that once. Do not recommend.
Oh.
Or rather, it was appropriate to the project, and I'm glad that I went there, but still, woof.
Yeah. Mhm. You've also written some other Snape pairings. How are they different?
Let's see. So, being a person who thinks that Snape is super interesting and complicated and probably the most interesting character in the entire series, it's like I can understand how Hermione might be interested in that, but I could also see how that could be appealing to other characters. One of my early and excellent fandom friends, Harmony Bites, who I knew mostly through LiveJournal and got to know through various fests and challenges, organized a Snoona Fest, so Snape and Luna Lovegood. And that was another one of those opportunities to go, okay, what the hell is this going to be? Let's see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process of doing that, because also I was originally a person that self-identified a lot with Hermione, but then Luna Lovegood appeared in the books, and I'm like, thank you for writing me into the story. This is great. So I'm sort of like halfway between those two characters as a person, I think. But writing Luna with Snape was so much fun because it was fun to create a world where she made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And Severus is completely mystified and annoyed by her, but also fascinated by her ability to see what other people, including him, do not. And so, but yes, so I had a lot of fun writing Luna Lovegood just because she is so very different from him, like an order of magnitude more than Hermione. And this is also kind of a weird me thing, but I really love pairing up Snape, whether romantically or socially, with male Weasleys. I think that, I haven't written Arthur Weasley Snape, but the fact that they're connected by Snape basically say, at least it's my headcanon that he's a big part of the reason that Arthur Weasley survived being bitten by Nagini. But also, I read this wonderful fic, Excessively Perky's Midnight by the Weasley Watch, and it's very chess-centric. And so it's about a chess tournament that happens at Hogwarts, and the student winner and the adult winners go on to an international chess tournament. And Ron wins the student side and Snape wins the teacher side. And none of these things is a given. And so it's all about watching how the chess manifests all these different things that are all the subtext of politics and what's going on in canon. It's a beautiful story. And it was like the first Snape and Ron friendship fic that I ever read. And it's to this day one of my absolute favorite stories. And so I already had that in the back of my brain, and so I got assigned to write. I'm trying to remember exactly what the prompt was, but I ended up interpreting it as Snape owning a comic book store and Ron applying for a job there, not realizing it was Snape who was running it. And so this is a Severus Hermione story, but the Severus Hermione stuff is sort of not happening in the forefront. It's sort of happening as Ron is finding his way after breaking up with Hermione in a rather spectacular fashion and basically having to go into hiding because everyone is so mad about it. So, and him finding sort of safe harbor working with Snape and selling comic books. I don't think that story could have existed in the way that it did had I not encountered Excessively Perky's work years and years before and just carried the headcanon that Snape and Ron could actually be friends. And I did also write a Snape Bill Weasley story, and it was just a little ficklet, but basically Bill Weasley has a long-term crush on Snape starting when he's a student, and basically how he wears Snape down over the years. And I love the character of Bill Weasley for many reasons, including the fact that Mr. 42 superficially resembles Bill Weasley.
Uh-huh.
So, yes, I like my gingers, and so it was fun to sort of pair up my spouse's like canon persona with a character that I've been obsessed with for a really long time. So yes, male Weasleys. I've read some wonderful Snape George Weasley fics. I mean, there's some great stuff out there. I think that's a really lovely, potent place to explore sort of someone who had no family with someone who has more family than they know what to do with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Snape is interesting enough. Both the characters are interesting enough that I like reading about how other people choose to pair them with other characters. There's plenty of good stuff to explore.
Oh, yeah. Okay, Death by Express, or The Affair of the Flying Train, is modeled after Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. What about that story inspired you to create your own version?
Oh, that's one of those where the idea immediately exploded into being. I was assigned to write for My Witch, and their prompt was just murder on the Hogwarts Express. And I'm like, yep, I know exactly what that is. I knew who my Cassetti was going to be. I knew that Hermione and Snape were going to be like Mary Debenham and Colonel Arbuthnot. And I knew that Minerva McGonagall was going to be Hercule Poirot. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be so much fun. So I've loved Murder on the Orient Express. It's my favorite of Christie's because it's got an ingenious plot. And as a person that likes to really have the plot be in service of all things, so that appealed, the idea of getting to basically have this twisty plot where everybody is out to get. Sorry, spoiler for both the fic and the story, but so yeah, basically it's a conspiracy of people who have had their lives destroyed or negatively impacted by one very evil person. And I like very much about the original that it has this underlying statement of how a violent act can damage an entire community. And because there's that subtext, and because there's this motivation, it's one of the very few examples of Poirot letting a murder go unpunished. So the question is, how do I do this in the wizarding world? And it was just like, well, of course, it's going to be like this. And yeah, it took me a while to like have these different ideas because the book ends with Poirot giving all the passengers on this train that's stuck in a snowdrift, it's like a closed room mystery, giving everybody, it's just like, okay, here's one explanation, but then here's this other more complicated explanation. And just basically leaving it up to the authority person there which explanation they think actually happened, so that giving them the opportunity to arrest everybody and throw them all in jail or to let them all go because this person really deserved to no longer be in the world. So yeah, it took a while to completely Harry Potterify the whole thing, but once I realized instead of the train getting stuck in a snowdrift, I was going to make it fly and crash into the lake. I'm like, okay, that is our catastrophic event. Let's go from there. And so I had so much fun with that story. I mean, lots of times a very specific visual image will be in my head when I start writing, and that is going to be sort of the impetus for the whole story. Or it comes to be emblematic as I'm writing. Like that one was absolutely Crashing the Hogwarts Express. I think Fine Art or Fine Print was the food fight. And, sometimes it takes a while to get there, but, that's half the fun of writing is watching the thing take shape. And finding in-world justifications for your somewhat arbitrary decisions earlier on.
Uh-huh. You mentioned the late shift at Palindrome.
Yes.
Which, yes, a magical comic book story, including a section on erotica.
Woohoo! The back room.
Yeah. Hermione is just spitting mad, I guess, for most of the.
Yep.
And it's also told from Ron's POV. Was it fun to write Snape and Hermione from more of a background perspective?
Totally. And that's sort of in service of, just experimenting more with how they can fit into the magical world. I mean, if they're at the center of the story, you're completely focused on that aspect of them. But it does sort of limit the kind of plot that you can have because, you've got these two characters and these are the most important people to the whole thing. And, you know, and as much as like plot, what plot or porn without plot or PWP fix are, that's they have their place. And believe me, I've read plenty of them over the years. But for me, I always want the romance to be generated by the plot. And, that's what I'm most drawn to writing. But in recent years, I guess I felt freer to put the focus on, things like the mystery in Death by Express or Ron and Snape's friendship in Late Shift at Palindrome. So I can have romance happen here, but I also think it's really neat if we have something else that it can sort of organically grow from. And in Late Shift to Palindrome, Hermione's journey sort of towards self-awareness and healing. She's just basically been in a toxic work environment, a very patriarchal work environment, and her relationship with Ron has suffered because they've been paired together professionally. And she, of course, is go, go, go all the time, and he just doesn't want that. And because she's surrounded by crime, she's seeing Death Eaters around every corner, and it is feeding the ruthless part of her nature, the angry part of her nature, that she never feels safe, that she never feels, that she never feels like she's going to measure up, that she's never going to get her due. And so she works harder and harder and harder. And their relationship suffers as finally Ron pulls the plug and he leaves. And so that's where we start the story after Ron has broken up with Hermione and he's basically hiding from everybody that's upset about it, including Hermione herself. And so Ron having more self-awareness than Hermione, I mean, that was a very particular choice, but he doesn't stay 12, 14 forever. I mean, and for him to really, I mean, he's the one that actually left them in the woods because he realized that, or at least in my headcanon, he couldn't be there anymore and it was intolerable to him. He didn't necessarily understand why it was intolerable, but he knew that whatever was going on, it just wasn't working and he needed to step back. And so he's a character that canonically was able to do that. And so when his relationship with Hermione, both professional and personal, just wasn't giving him what he needed, he had the ability to step away from it. And he was right. I mean, in the world of this story, he was absolutely right to do so. And so, but the other fun thing about writing Ron in that context is in Severus Hermione, you have to do something with Ron in order to pair up Hermione romantically with someone else, either to have a bad relationship, and that's why they seek each other out. He has to be killed. He has to be made into a complete awful character. That he's often the obstacle that overcoming is how you get Severus and Hermione together. And in this one, it's just like having Ron be supportive of this and having a friendship with Severus and seeing Severus's growth and wanting that for Hermione as well. Like I say, I write because in the process of writing, I find things that I haven't ever thought of about these characters before. And there were so many fun surprises in writing that story because sometimes I go in and say, okay, this is going to have smut in it. But plenty of times I'm like, I have no idea if I'm going to fade to black. I have no idea if there's going to be on-screen intimacy. I don't know. The story will reveal this to me in the appointed time. And so I realized that there was going to be a love scene, but the whole story was from Ron's point of view. And I couldn't just head hop for no reason, just for the purpose of smut. And it's like, how do I make this work? How do I make this consensual? How do I make this what the characters need? And so I ended up writing Ron being a voyeur and Hermione getting off on being watched. And I'm like, okay, that's where we're going. And, because we've had this angry Hermione this entire time and like physically attacking people, I mean, she's not in a happy place. But then creating, a sexual play space where she could explore that. And so, yeah, it's definitely BDSM elements, but also we see this self-care that happens afterwards and the like coming out of that play space, in a safe and supportive way. So, I mean, there's a lot of BDSM where, I feel like the author is trying to instruct the audience at the same time that you're instructing Hermione, and I did not want it to be that kind of story. I wanted it to be very immediate, but that was great to be able to do from Ron's watching because he was having a response, even as he's like, holy shit, I can't believe this is happening. And wow. And, watching them basically verbally flay one another while they're getting intimate. I mean, it was like, okay, that was something I didn't realize I was going to be writing when I started this process. Cool. And sometimes I do have to contact people and just say, the story is telling me it needs to be this. Can I do that? And having them say, yes, yes, you can, and you should, and so that's very helpful. But yeah, so you never know. But yeah, and that's something that never would have happened if I hadn't had this additional point of view character and let myself just say, okay, that's how this story is telling me it needs to write. Let's lean into that and see where it takes us.
Yeah. Oh, it was great. I really enjoyed that story.
Thank you. It's one that I go back to. Each of them was about a very particular time in my life at the same time I was writing the story. And so I have a couple of stories that stem from a time that I lost a friend. He had a heart attack at the age of 35, just keeled over, no
Mm.
pre-existing conditions, no health issues, nothing. It just happened. And so one of his interests was erotic comics. And so he's in that story. And he's in other stories in other places, but like I wrote his favorite coffee beverage into another story. So lots of times I work through stuff in stories, even if they're just there as Easter eggs for me personally, that gives them, nice reread value. And it's like, oh gosh, I remember that. It's good. So that's one that reminds me of him in some ways. So
Mm. We talked a little bit about the fine art of fine print, where Molly is pretty out there. Very, yeah,
yes.
very manipulative and kind of mean.
Yes, and very determined for other people to live their lives the way that she wants to see them done.
Hmm. Yeah, Hermione is an unspeakable who's called to Hogwarts to do some testing for Molly.
To investigate something that has been sort of a thorn in her side. And because she forces everybody to do stuff that she wants. And basically, I like Ron in that story because I sort of leaned into the whole idea of him as a strategist. And even though we don't really see it until we get towards the end, the degree to which Ron has really seized this opportunity to make things better, even though it's not what Hermione wants, and it is very much what his mother wants. So I enjoyed being able to sort of, well, I keep calling myself a chaos muppet. I like to break things, especially when they're untenable. And Molly is basically driving Hogwarts into the ground in order to create sort of this vision for her family that she wants. And so she basically has forced a lot of the characters, including Severus and including Hermione, to play a part in maintaining this fictitious state that only really exists in her mind, and with a lot of people deferring their goals, their hopes, and their dreams. And so blowing that up was really fun. Another thing that I got to explore in that story was placing Molly, who's the Hogwarts headmistress at the time, with no real qualifications, and oh my God, that is so relevant right now. So this person with no real qualifications other than, having some reputation that means to basically crash things into the ground and make them terrible because that's the world that they want to create. But they do so without the consent of other people involved by like bullying, by creating an environment where they have to do the thing that she wants. Otherwise, it's not going to be good. And they also want to maintain their relationship with her. And also by playing up people against one another, like Hermione and Severus are not at all aligned at the beginning of this story. And, basically it takes some doing to get them to a place where they're willing to work honestly with one another to bring about her downfall. But it's also fun because there's absolutely canon precedent for Hogwarts heads doing really sketchy things. And so I enjoyed having the opportunity to sort of place this autocratic, horrible headmistress in the context of this position where they have a fair amount of power to do so. We've seen Severus when Voldemort was in charge. I mean, he had to do all sorts of things and allow all sorts of horrible things just because of political pressure from the outside. Even Dumbledore made some very questionable decisions during his tenure that, negatively impacted a lot of people. And just the idea that there had been this long history of Hogwarts heads doing really somewhat morally gray things that they might not necessarily be fully aware of the repercussions, or for, protecting their own interests over that of the students, or in some cases what they considered to be the greater good. There are always questions as to whose greater good it is. So I had a lot of fun with that story. So my day job, I work in administration in education, and that story that really comes through. You've got all of these people, seeing bad results and everyone with ideas about how to fix it, but only limited ability to enact reforms.
Right.
And so there's a lot of educational frustration in the story as well, when that has spilled into all sorts of things. I mean, really, we got to see it during, when Betsy DeVos was head of education, this rather awful person who's in favor of for-profit education, just basically trying to undermine everything about public education. And we're about to see another iteration of that. But, I
Mhm.
hate that this story is so relevant right now, but also, yay, it's relevant right now.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Oh my goodness. It's been a time. And for someone who has deliberately tried to be in spaces where, a lot of people who are vulnerable to the vicissitudes of politics, and in some cases where it's a matter of life and death, it's just like, oh, this is a hard time. But,
Mhm.
that's why I'm really grateful that I have fandom. That's why I'm really grateful that I have fan fiction to basically work through all of these things. Because
Yeah.
at a time like this when you don't know which of your real life friends is safe, I mean, geez, it's really good to have these spaces of people who, believe what you believe and can work through grief, can work through trauma. And it can also really galvanize your feelings of wanting to do something. And,
Mhm.
if making Grumpy Wizard rock and writing grumpy fan fiction is, it's cathartic for me, but if it can help other people, hey, that's awesome. I'm really happy we have these tools at our disposal.
Yeah.
I mean, fan fiction is by itself a subversive space. I mean, largely it exists because people are seeing the art that's out there and wanting to make it more something that represents them, where they can see themselves. And sometimes that involves, I mean, like, half of the Twilight fandom exists because people are like, we can write this better than Stephanie Meyer, and we know what these characters should actually be doing. Gotcha. You know, a whole bunch of Severus Hermione people defected to Twilight, by the way.
Oh. Uh-huh.
I did not, but and that's fine. I'm glad that, because any fandom that feeds your creative soul is where you need to be. And you can be in a lot of places, you can be in one place, it's all valid and it's all awesome. Whatever makes you want to make stuff, I'm in favor.
Yeah. Your story, Recapitulation, is an awesome SSHG story that features Hermione's son Hugo and his boyfriend Victor as music students. Now, when she meets Victor, he bears a stunning resemblance to Severus, which spurs Hermione to look for Snape. Now, this is all really cool. But also, when I looked up the definition for recapitulation, I found that it's the final part of the structure of a musical sonata after exposition and development. How did you come upon such a clever form for the story?
Well, first off, I love that. Thank you for that very wonderful and flattering description of my work. That's another story that I love. That's a comfort read for me. That's the story where I wrote my friend who passed. That's the one I wrote his coffee order into. So when Hermione gets a cafe cubano, that's where that comes from. So as you know, I'm a musician and largely in the classical space. So, musical forms are something that's somewhat intuitive to me, but also can be very expressive in terms of storytelling. So recapitulation, the story, I've got music. That is one of the very few times that I've just been like, screw it. I'm going to write musicians into this story. I'm going to write about music magic. I'm going to write about people making music, and with music being a part that's embedded in like every level of the story, from what the characters do, music that gets played or sung or performed as part of the story. So we've got it all over the place. And that was very deliberate on my part, because I'm like, what is the special interest that is going to shape this? And also, my friend who passed, he was also a musician. He was like executive director of a music nonprofit locally. And, I met him because he and Mr. 42 were in grad school together studying music. So that's another way that my friend is in this story. And so Hermione's son Hugo and Snape's offspring Victor. So Victor and Hugo, that was also a stupid little joke I made, but it makes me laugh. But anyway. So their romance is, this is another thing where the focus is, it's on both of these relationships, both Hugo and Vic's, as well as Severus and Hermione's. But at the beginning of the story, Hermione believes Severus to be dead, and then this young man walks in talking about his dad and saying he looks exactly like his dad and he's a dead ringer for Severus Snape. And that's sort of my precipitating event, is having Hermione meet her son's boyfriend. But yeah, so Sorry, but back to the question of recapitulation. So because there's so much music in it and of like all eras from like Beethoven and Thomas Tallis to like the Beach Boys. So it's more structured like a late romantic symphony because it's got all the chapters have names of tempo markings that usually are, that's how you describe like the first movement is this tempo, and the second movement is slow, and the third movement is this. This one has to be a dance, and then the final movement sort of brings it all together. But the overarching theme, I think, is very sonata-like. So the sonata is it's three parts. You've got your sort of opening slash exposition, where it introduces a very like a distinctive thematic element. Then the development section, where you take that thematic element and you twist it and you do all sorts of weird stuff to it, and then you have it come back at the end. And because it's now gone through that development, it's still the recognizable theme, but it's also different from what it was before. I mean, it's the sonata is kind of like it's like a narrative in musical form, and it's a very elegant structure. It's got a long history. So I guess Snape is kind of our distinctive thematic material, and then the development sort of happens off screen in the intervening years. But then when we meet Vic, he's sort of like the return of the original theme. And not to explicitly spoil one of the big plot twists, but I think Vic the son is absolutely a metaphorical repetition of the opening Snape theme. And the other thing I love about Recapitulation is it's one of the very few stories where I didn't have to fight to come up with the title. I'm like, boom. The whole idea is that we're getting to see, again, in somewhat thematic terms, we're getting to see how different Severus's life would have been had he been raised in a loving environment. And that's what we've got in his son. And yeah, I like that story. It makes me cry. It's one of the few where I actually write an on-screen death. And I mean, and it's gentle, it's non-violent, but it is very, very, very sad. And so if I need a good cry, that story is almost guaranteed to do that. I wrote another one about pet death, which doesn't sound like a very cheerful story, but it's very heartfelt and it's actually pretty funny. So yeah, it's good to have stuff for hard days when I need to cry. It's something that I can go and read and just feel like, yeah, I'm visiting past me who is grieving, but it also helps present me in a time of grief as well. And I feel that way both about stories and about music, because it allows you to say things that are important to you at this very particular time in your life, and it'll mean something different 5 years from now. It'll mean something different 10 years from now, but you'll see different things in it than you realize that you were writing. And I guess that's kind of nice to be able to give gifts to your future self. At least that's how I tend to approach the storytelling process. It's like, how can I explore something that means something to me and be reminded of why it meant something to me?
Could you read for us?
I would be delighted to do so. And I think I will record that separately though.
Yeah, we'll put that at the end of the interview, but did you want to talk a little bit about it before?
Oh, sure. Let's see. So the story that I'm gonna read is called And You're Gone. And it was written in 2012 because in a live journal community called HP Con Envy. And this was for all of us who were not able to go to any given Harry Potter convention that was happening. And so to give us something to do and to entertain ourselves while all our other friends were off having fun and IRL adventures. And so, we would give each other like short little prompts or something like that. And so I wrote this for a friend of mine who I knew was a Beatles fan. And so this is my take on Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and why you should never, ever, ever make a bet with Severus Snape.
Yeah, so we'll play that after the interview, and it's a great story. I loved it.
I'm so glad. Sometimes I write stuff, and if I write it for a community, I lose it until I remember that it exists somehow. Like, there's a wonderful live journal and now Dream With group called One Bad Man. So it's a Slytherin-centric rec community. And I revisited them because, of course, I follow them. And I'm like, oh, what stories of mine have they wrecked? Because I know they've wrecked a number of them over the years. And right at the time that it was written, it had been shared to the group. And I'm like, oh my God, I totally forgot about the Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds fic.
Oh,
And I'm like, this is still really cute. I should put it on AO3. And so I did.
I'm glad you did.
Me too. And thank you. It's one of the very few like short fics that I've written, because most of the stuff that I write is in the like 10,000 to 35,000 word range. That's the novella length is a very comfortable space that for me to hang out in, but one of the very few short stories. Yay.
Where can we find you online?
Let's see. As a writer, so I'm Mundungus42, Mundungus, no space or underscore, just Mundungus42, and that's pretty much everywhere. I'm there. I'm at that name on AO3, FFN, Petulant Poetess, The Wicked Archives, Tumblr, though I'm not really active there, Twitter, though that is going away presently. RIP. I'll probably be moving to Blue Sky, but I'm not there yet, but I probably will be soon. I am on Discord, so if you're all into Wizard Rock or into Severus Hermione stuff, I'm in Wizard Rock. I am in Hearts and Cauldrons. Hearts, and it's a ampersand Cauldrons. The only open membership, but just message the mod, Naomi Jemison, and she'll let you know when it's open again. There's Potions and Parchment, which is another place. T Goblin runs that, and they're great. So those are the three biggest places: Wizard Rock, Hearts and Cauldrons, and Potions and Parchment. I'm very, very fond of those spots. And of course, Wizard Rock. So on Discord in the Wizard Rock server, I'm also, I think it's called Wizard Rock Revival on Facebook, and I'm fairly active there. Let's see, I'm both as Potter Watch and Urwa. We're on Bandcamp, but that's probably the best place to find all of our music is a website called Your Wizard Rock Resource. So it's yourwizardrockresource.wordpress.com. And that is an incredible resource that has everything about, it has all these wizard rockers, and the pages there actually have the complete discography of everything you've ever made. And this is notable because if you submit stuff to a compilation album, it won't be under your wizard rocker name, it'll be under the organizer's name. For example, all the wonderful sea shanty compilations both Potter Watch and Urwa have had music on, those are on Totally Knutz's Bandcamp and not ours. So the best way to find those things is at yourwizardrockresource.wordpress.com. Susanna does that, and oh my gosh, it's such a labor of love, but is fantastic, and it's also a great way to find who's making music now, because like the fanfic space, whoever's making music and whoever's writing fic, it comes in waves. There have been mass exoduses. There have been, people just drifting away from it, people's lives taking them in other directions. I mean, there are any number of reasons, but yeah, that's such a fantastic resource. And after an archive can blow up at any time, a social media site can be bought at any time by a bad actor determined to exploit it for their own gain or to advance their vile notions. We've got AO3, and that's about as stable as it gets because it's crowdfunded, but LiveJournal got bought by bad actors who wanted to police activist content in Russia. I mean, it's like anything can happen at any time, and it probably will. So just try to diversify where you exist, and hopefully you'll be able to find your people.
And we'll have some links again on additional reading.
Fantastic. So
yeah,
thank you so much for having me for this. This has been so much fun, and like I said, I kind of want to interview you now because, oh my gosh, you've been in fandom, pretty much as long as I have, and been consuming fic and various other wonderful things, but there's no one way to fandom, and we can all learn from each other, and I love being able to do that. So thank you for amplifying so many interesting and diverse voices on your podcast.
Well, thank you. And you're just another person who's so awesome, and thank you so much for coming to speak with me.
Are you kidding? This has been so much fun, and thank you for asking me.
You bet. Okay.
So would you like me to read now, or should I read and send you like the audio file, or how would you like to do that? I can do either way.
It's probably easier for you to record it and send it, do you think?
Sure. I can, let's see.
Or if you want, we can read now.
Let's see. Let me pull up my story. And You're Gone by Mundungus42. Summary. Hermione loses a bet, but wins the war. Contains Beatles music. In retrospect, it had probably been a bad idea to make a bet with Severus Snape that involved a band that broke up before she was born. But every generation tried to claim the Beatles as their own, so Hermione's was a sin of vanity rather than pride. As such, She supposed the prescribed punishment of collecting Caledonian pixie excrement from a nesting site in the Forbidden Forest, a painstaking, dirty job, fit the crime all too well. As did, she supposed, Severus's insistence on whistling the tune that had got her into trouble while she worked. Unfortunately, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was not the most melodious of songs, particularly when whistled by someone with a questionable sense of pitch. Hermione slapped absently at a pixie that had landed on her shoulder and was about to bite. It flew off with a honk like an offended bagpipe, but not before making a fresh deposit of droppings on her right arm. You'll want to collect that before it dries. Hermione considered wiping the mess on him, but decided that Severus holding a grudge was slightly more obnoxious than Severus gloating. Instead, she took the platinum tweezers in her left hand and awkwardly transferred the soft green spheroids into the fresh jar. Once they had been engulfed by the stasis charm's glow, Hermione stood and brushed off her robes. "And just where are you going?" "Back to the castle," she said. "The terms of the bet were to collect droppings in all stages of freshness. You never specified how much of each, and according to the Porodovsky rules of social engagement, as the one paying the forfeit, I may use my discretion in interpreting vague instructions." "Very well," said Severus grudgingly. "You may carry the samples back to the dungeon." "Oh, may I?" asked Hermione, shrinking the bottles and tucking them into her pocket. "How terribly generous of you." He gave her a smirk, and she chastised herself for responding sarcastically. She had hoped to be above this, but of all her colleagues, Severus was the one that could get under her skin, seemingly without trying. Unfortunately, the slip couldn't be undone, and he started whistling again. Hermione gritted her teeth, transferred the sample flasks into the basket with several flicks of her wand, and stalked off in the general direction of the castle. His tuneless whistling followed her. The sun was setting over the forest, and through breaks in the canopy Hermione could see the clouds catching the last of the sun's rays, turning them incandescent orange. She slowed her ill-tempered march, and once the acrid smell of pixie droppings had faded, Hermione began to enjoy the sights and the smells of the forest at dusk. The vines of evening glories opening their yellow and green blossoms, and the vaguely sulphurous smell of wet earth mingled with the sweet smell of the mallows. She stopped beneath a tree adorned with sweet-smelling white blossoms and took a drink from her water flask. "Granger." Severus's voice was quiet, and in the dangerous way that made her freeze instantly. Hermione didn't make it a habit of looking into her colleague's eyes, but she knew instantly that something was odd. Severus's pupils were dilated, and the irises swam with beautiful colors and amorphous shapes. The sight was arresting enough that it took her a moment to gather her wits enough to realize that he was speaking. He cleared his throat. I don't suppose the resident know-it-all knows the properties of a Caledonian pixie droppings. Of course I do, that's why I wore gloves. But you were exposed when the little beast relieved itself on your arm. The contact was only seconds long, and if I were poisoned, wouldn't it be obvious?" Severus leaned heavily on the trunk of the tree and closed his eyes. "Think, Granger, about recorded sensitivities to doxy droppings. It stands to reason that their closest relatives might bring about a similar reaction in a certain percentage of the population." Hermione frowned. "If that were the case, I would be the one exhibiting symptoms, not you." He gave a harsh laugh and gazed overhead. "How do you know you're not?" Hermione glanced up to see what he was looking at, and she was taken aback to see that the evening glory vines had climbed all over the towering trees in the vicinity. "Impossible!" "It's the damned song," said Snape. "In the response to pixie poisoning, your body is emitting a hallucinogenic compound that's making us see the lyrics." Hermione gazed at him in disbelief until she noticed that the normally white collar of his robes was softly reflecting the strange orange light in the sky like burnished silver. "Looking-glass ties," she said. "It's beautiful." "The aesthetic merits of the experience are irrelevant," said Snape, scowling. "More to the point, I don't trust my senses enough to collect the ingredients for an antidote." "Is it only our vision that's affected?" asked Hermione. "I know for a fact that tangerine trees are an impossibility in this climate," said Severus, gesturing to the spread of shiny green leaves and white flowers over their heads. "Pleasant fragrance and cool shade notwithstanding, this hallucination seems as real to me as you do." We could walk until we come to a newspaper taxi stand, suggested Hermione brightly, or ask one of the plasticine porters for directions. Snape gave her a truly foul look. I'd be better off on my own. Hermione sat at the base of the tree, watching the evening glories grow brighter in the fading light. We could simply stay here and wait for it to wear off. I don't feel unwell, and if mild, thoroughly enjoyable hallucinations are the worst side effect we suffer, I'd say we're doing well enough. It's not safe to be here after dark, said Severus, and certainly not when our senses are addled. If you don't trust our eyes, our ears, our noses, or our senses of direction, then what exactly do you propose? Severus held up a hand to silence her. Be silent. A twig snapped nearby, and Hermione's head whipped in the direction of the sound to see where it had come from. At the very edge of the clearing, the silhouette of a horse's head appeared, bobbing up and down strangely. The mouth opened and it spoke, but the sound was very far away and unintelligible. The entire effect was decidedly sinister. Hermione glanced at Severus. "Rocking horse people," she whispered. He seized her hand, and in a whirl of black they shot up into the air. Branches reached out from the trees, tearing at Hermione's hair and scraping her arms and face, and she cried out in pain. Silver streaks shot past them, which confirmed that the interlopers had been centaurs. But a second later they had cleared the canopy and they were flying through the sky, and the stars were beginning to come out. The centaurs' arrows continued to streak across the sky, drawing silvery lines through the constellations as they appeared. And Hermione gasped at the tiny pinpricks of light in the firmament grew dazzlingly bright. "Can you see the castle?" shouted Severus over the rush of the wind. "All I can see is the stars," shouted Hermione. Severus reduced their velocity, and Hermione was treated to the sight of the world stretched out beneath her, the river filled with tiny boats, each guided by a point of starlight. Fantastical people carrying multicolored lanterns stood on a bridge, waving to the boats. Black and white taxicabs lining the bank near the dock, and the Hogwarts Express chugging into Hogsmeade Station, which was filled with toy figurines the size of people and people the size of toy figurines. And overhead the stars shone like enormous gems in the firmament. He pulled her close. "This is what the song was about," he said, breath warm in her ear. "A child imagining someone he loved, flying through the night sky. Can't you see that?" "I do now that I'm under the influence of a hallucinogenic substance," said Hermione acidly. "I still say it's not out of the realm of possibility that the composer was when he imagined most of the song, too." He chuckled in her ear, and it might have been the hallucinations, but she could have sworn that his lips brushed the shell of her ear before he whispered, "But the title of the song had nothing to do with LSD, which was the claim you made earlier." She settled against him, watching the glorious sky reflected in the surface of the river. As they passed through a cloud, she felt his lips on her neck. And the goose flesh that ran down her arms had nothing to do with the cool water vapor condensing on her skin. They flew for what felt like hours, fingers twining and mouths languidly exploring one another's, until the familiar silhouette of Hogwarts appeared on the horizon. It was with a certain amount of regret, Hermione felt, that Severus alighted on the astronomy tower. Her supposition was supported when he kissed her. Though his lips were warm, his nose was cold from the wind, and she held him tightly as she leaned into the kiss. When they parted, he had a sardonic, though not at all unpleasant look on his face. "I hope you've learned your lesson, Granger," he said, tucking some unruly tendrils behind her ear. "I've learned several. The first is not to place bets with you involving the lads from Liverpool unless I'm prepared to pay a whopping great forfeit." "Good. What else?" "That I Am the Walrus definitely contains evidence of Paul McCartney's demise." He scowled at her. "You can't be serious." "Perfectly, and I'm willing to bet you." He stared at her disbelievingly for a moment before he started to laugh. "I'll take that bet," he said. "Good," said Hermione. She rose on her tiptoes to give him a final kiss. "Sweet dreams. I'll meet you in an English garden waiting for the sun." Severus smiled to herself as she departed. She still had the pixie droppings. The end.
Oh, that's so fun.
I do love getting to write a story with the first kiss in it. I mean, that goes back to the very first fan fiction I ever read, you know?
Uh-huh.
It's good fun.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, Mundungus42, thanks again for joining me.
It has been an unmitigated pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Snapecentric, and for inviting me on Snape Chat.
Oh, you bet. Hey, take care.
You too, and thanks.
I hope you enjoyed our chat as much as I did. Thanks again to Mundungus42 for speaking with me. Go to snapechatpodcast.com and our additional reading page for links to her stories, music, and more. And here we must say goodbye. We wish we didn't have to, but it hasn't escaped our notice that life isn't fair. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Tumblr and X, or leave a comment on our website at snapechatpodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Many thanks to Nyx for continued work on our website at snapechatpodcast.com. Be sure to check out Care of Magical Shippers podcast and alwayssnape.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, stay snarky.